Thank you for that deafening round of applause. Just so great to be welcomed by the Music Matters crowd. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Great that you're all here for this is now the most important session of today. I can tell you that, so you've chosen the right place. My name is Ralph Simon, and I'm going to introduce you to a very, very interesting group of great professionals talking about connected devices and talking about the way in which connected devices are really changing the business. So, I beg your pardon, I had my back to you. I'd like to introduce you to our very esteemed panelists here today. First of all, on my left, all the way from San Francisco, is Soumya Subramanian, who is the Director of Engineering for YouTube. Soumya, give her a big, nice, warm welcome. Thank you. Sitting next to Soumya, also from San Francisco, well, Emeryville, which is just across the Bay Bridge from San Francisco, we have the Vice President of Product at Gracenote, the great metadata company, Tom Rettig. Give Tom a big hand, please. Then in the middle, someone who is a very deeply experienced specialist in connected music. He lives in Seattle, and he is the Director of Content Acquisition for Amazon Music. Please welcome Rishi Mirchandani. Rishi. And then moving along, someone who is originally from Belgium but now lives in Hong Kong. He is the Business Development and Marketing Strategy Senior Director at Sony Music. Please welcome Sean Paltiel. Sean. And last but by very no means least, the Chief Digital Officer of PS. How many of you know what PS is? Two of you. What does PS stand for? Play It Again Sam. Exactly, that's the name of the company. Play It Again Sam. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Adrian Pope. Adrian, give him a big hand. So here we are talking about connected devices and the importance of them, and we'll go through this to give you a sense of where it's going, what's coming, what can help you and your business. And so I'd like to start off, Tom, with yourself, if we could, particularly because one of the things that you've been working on at Gracenote is the critical importance of clean and normalized factual metadata. What does that mean?
Factual and descriptive metadata. So normalized means that there's a single representation of any given entity. So for folks who work with a lot of music data, for example, most music catalogs have multiple representations for the same artist in it. So you can have dozens or hundreds of these. We're always trying to clean the metadata to get it to a single representation for any artist, any album, any recording. And this, having this data cleaner makes for a better end user experience because services like YouTube or Spotify don't have to spend as much time cleaning that data. The other thing that we do is add enhanced descriptive metadata in the form of things like genre, mood, style, tempo, etc., language, to be able to better serve up the right content for the right users.
And in terms of the work that you do, you're also looking at improving voice-driven music experiences, either in a car or certainly with voice that can basically call in and get correct descriptive metadata so that the response time to getting your repertoire or getting your music is quicker, cleaner.
Right, so we've been supporting the automotive industry for about 10 or 15 years. We've been in the speech implementations that have been in the car to date, largely through working with Nuance, but of course other services are starting to come in to automotive as well. So yeah.
And the whole notion of content recognition technology, recognizing content, recognizing unusual content, maybe oftentimes you get supplied metadata information that might not be absolutely accurate. It's really important for the professionals in this audience to know that the better they can have their content basically detailed, that will help the attribution. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so we do we have built recognition technologies. A lot of this, people are in this room are probably familiar with Shazam, using that as a consumer experience, and we do support things like that in services like Comcast in North America, which uses voice commands on a remote. But increasingly, we're finding that using automatic content recognition by way of fingerprint is a good method for identifying what music is being consumed. So in a music service, that content is largely known because the music services know what they're delivering to the end user. But in places where people are uploading user-generated content, trying to identify if there's any if that's commercial content or intellectual property is something that automatic content recognition can help with as part of a chain of rights payment.
So Samir, you're in a fascinating position. You've been at Google for 12 years. You really understand the way that technology, engineering helps to drive a key element. And in fact, with YouTube, one of the key things that you try and do from an engineering point of view is to give people more time for fun. Yeah. So just give us an idea of some of the mechanics of what you've been working on, particularly because YouTube is just such a massive 1.8 billion hours a day being watched around the world. Just give us some sense of your vertical strategy that better serves users and creators on YouTube. Just give us a sense.
Sure. YouTube, if you look back 10 years, it started out as a place where you can find anything. Anyone can find anything. Whether you're a music fan, a sports fan, or a kid trying to learn something, you can find it on YouTube, which it still is the case. But a few years ago, one of the things that we put our heads together and thought about was, if we really want this experience to become delightful and engaging and meaningful for those super kind of engaged users who are specifically interested in one kind of vertical more than others, how can we do better there? And that's how we moved from this single app monolithic experience to a multi-app model with more specialized experiences. So YouTube Kids was the first one of our apps that we launched, which is very much, we redesigned the entire user interaction paradigm and also how we looked at content, how we did the classification, what kind of additional metadata and controls we put in to really make that experience fun for kids. And similarly with music, we've taken the same approach. We're really serious about music. And if you think about it, YouTube is the largest platform where music is consumed day in and day out. And it's one of the places where everyone comes for music discovery. At the same time, we're a video platform. So nobody thinks of YouTube as the listening service either. So in the last few years where we've launched music app and the YouTube subscription service, we're really trying to kind of provide users with the right mix of audio video experience based on the context that they're in and make it delightful. So, and we're hearing really positive things from our partners so far and users.
So one of the biggest elements of YouTube, which is perhaps not mentioned in the same breath, is your Android platform, which particularly in Asia is a massive platform, way bigger than certainly the iPhone platform, just simply because Android is so much more widely dispersed through Huawei, through Samsung and so forth. Just in terms of looking at your wide reach, what you do, and trying to develop what you call watch time. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so, every company needs a North Star that you're going after, and for us, for a long time, it's been watch time. Like, how do we really drive more engagement with our fans, and as an indication that we're doing the right thing, right? We were talking backstage, many times it's easy to serve you the first song or first piece of video to consume, but from there, how do you help the person navigate, and where is the jump-off points from there? And that's what we are really good at, is in terms of discovery. And having that Android ecosystem and the penetration that is there in Asia is huge because we then have a lot of context. We know that you're commuting back from work to home, or you're stuck in traffic, or you're out on a run. And all of those signals help us provide you with the discovery personalization without you having to do that much work.
So if someone's following Waze, which is also a
Yeah.
Google product, basically that personalization that's built into your algorithmic search
Yes.
just helps you better provide what might be their taste
Yeah.
on YouTube.
Yeah, so like, you know, for people, I mean, I think many of you use Android, you get a notification saying your commute today is going to be 2 hours longer because of traffic, for instance. And that same exact information is available to the entire Google ecosystem. So YouTube can also use that information, YouTube Music, and then we can say, hey, like, you know, maybe you want to listen to this kind of music while you're sitting around in traffic versus driving on the countryside. Right?
So when we talk of connected devices, from your perspective, from the YouTube perspective, where you tie in the creative end of music, where your music teams are getting insight from artists, artist managers, labels and so forth. When you look at connected devices from Google's perspective, Alphabet's perspective, YouTube's perspective, what would those connected devices be? Give us a sense. Yes, you talk about mobile.
Mobile, Google Home.
Google Home, which is the smart speakers.
Which is the smart speakers.
Right.
Your living room experiences, so TV and smart TVs.
Right.
I think those are the ones that we're looking at right now, but over time it can be your Google Watch, you know, automobile, Google Auto in the car. It's pretty much everywhere, right? And our whole virtual reality, we're investing a lot in virtual and augmented reality, which can provide such a unique experience to consume concerts, for instance, that today require you to go to a concert hall to do, but you can just bring it to your home or bring it to wherever you are.
Right. So all of this really indicates that you guys are serious about really enhancing the experience, because obviously UX, very, very big imperative for everybody that's on the stage.
Yeah, we are very serious about delighting our users and also working hand in hand with the music artists and the music industry, in music in particular, right? To really bring that artist-fan connection. Because if you think about it, you know, we are positioned so nicely. We're neither just a distribution or retail platform, nor are we just a social network. We are really the mix of both. And that's when the magic happens, when you connect the fans with the artists, and create that cycle. And monetization, of course, plays into that.
Samir, please just give us your sense of the importance of attribution.
Yeah.
Because that's a big, big issue, particularly for creators, for artists, who sometimes complain that they don't get paid effectively enough. And sometimes it's because they don't send the correct attribution data, as Tom is referring to.
So attribution comes in many forms, right? So one is like what you were talking about from a Gracenote point of view, the metadata quality, so that we can classify music correctly. We can make sure the artist entity is defined well and the discography that goes with the artist is correct. Like we don't want Lady Gaga's music showing up with Taylor Swift's artist page, because it's her brand, it's their brand on the platform. So attribution and metadata quality is really important from that point of view. The other point of view is, as I said, in that relationship that you're trying to build between the artist and the fan, and the artist is trying to have that direct to consumer connection, it's really important that the fan, when they're consuming your content, when they listen to that music or when they're watching that video, know that this is coming from this creative person. And that connection with that artist is important, and that's where the attribution is really, really key. The other thing we're looking at in terms of attribution is it's not just the person who's singing, right? It's not just Taylor Swift, or I should use more local examples, but I keep using Taylor Swift. But you know, it's not just the musician themselves, but it's also maybe the songwriter. In YouTube, if we have like endemic creators collaborating with artists to do some interesting mashups, you want the creator to get that attribution too. And that helps you kind of grow your fan funnel and your fan engagement. So if I collaborate with you, now I suddenly have the reach of both of our fans because of that attribution. So it's that whole ecosystem that's kind of fueling itself.
So the fan funnel important. I mean, imagine if you're a 10-year-old girl and you love Taylor Swift and you want to meet Taylor Swift, YouTube might be the way that you can do it.
Yeah, try a community post. I tell that to my daughter all the time.
Oh, very good. Okay, so Rishi, there you are sitting in Seattle now with probably the most important company in the world, Amazon. Jeff Bezos now the wealthiest man in the world, eclipsing Bill Gates by, I don't know, $30–40 billion, a smart guy. But you're in a very interesting position because effectively you're looking at the development of voice-generated instructions for Alexa. Not Alexa's, what's Alexa's position in APAC? It's not well represented as yet.
Not yet. We're continuing to introduce new countries, but there's right now we've got localized Alexa's services in the US, UK, Germany, Japan, and India.
And what's the pickup been so far in those initial markets for voice-generated Alexa-like music?
Well, yeah, let me tell you about it in the context of our music services. So for those of you who don't know, we operate 2 streaming services, Prime Music, which is a limited catalog service that comes bundled with Amazon Prime, which is our
2 million songs, right?
2 million songs, which is our kind of core membership program. And then we have Amazon Music Unlimited, which is a standalone full catalog subscription service available for a standalone subscription fee.
And that's 40 million songs in that particular
It's
category.
tens of millions of songs, correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us the difference between the two and what you are experiencing with Prime, because obviously it's successful for Amazon, and your general thinking about music and music development, and particularly addressing customer need.
So when we launched Amazon Prime Music, which was in 2014, the first Echo device launched just 3 months later. And what we saw right away was how powerful voice could be for transforming how customers interact with music. And we saw 2 things. Initially, there were very few devices available because it was still in beta, but we saw a very high degree of engagement coming from these devices. And then we also saw how people were interacting with the devices. We were all beta testers, so we all have the devices in our home. And when you watched how people interacted, you could see how it reduced the friction for listening to music. So if I'm cooking in my kitchen and I wanted to change what was playing or change the volume of what I was listening to be able to do that with my voice was a game changer. I also have 2 young daughters, and I could see the hours that they would spend listening to music. They initially in the kitchen, coming and asking for music and just having dance parties, and eventually we'd get them a device and put it in their room so they could do that there. And they now will never not know what it's like to just be able to ask for music. And when we watched how consumers were interacting with the devices, we saw that they were interacting in much more intuitive and natural ways. So instead of just asking for an artist or a song, which they would do sometimes, they might ask for a genre of music, or they might ask for a mood of music, or they would start putting the 2 together and they'd say, you know, play me happy country music, or play me upbeat dance music. So as we were operating a music service, we had to look at how customers were interacting with music and make sure we were making the right investments in our catalog and metadata so that we could serve up the right music for customers. The interesting thing about a voice environment is that when a customer asks for music, we just start playing it right away. So we have to feel pretty confident that we're going to give you the right result, because you can't, unlike a visual environment where you can pick the right result, if we give you the wrong thing and it starts playing, that's not going to be a good experience for the customers. So we spend a lot of time thinking about what is the right metadata in our catalog that we need, what are the types of metadata that we need, and even basic stuff like the release date of an album. Oftentimes an album will be reissued and someone will forget to put the original release date in. Well, that's going to have an impact if someone wants to play music from the 80s and in our catalog it says that that album came out in 2018. So there's basic things like that where we go in and make sure the metadata is correct so that we can serve up the right music. And then there's new types of metadata. Another thing that we saw customers doing is asking for music by saying, play me the latest single by Taylor Swift. And when you look in the metadata, if she's on the 3rd single from her album, you can't tell what their most recent single is because they all came out at the same time. So we started tracking radio impact dates. So when did the label take that song to radio? And that was a signal for us that we could look at and figure out what the latest single was by an artist. And yeah, we started talking and having conversations with labels, and now they'll programmatically send that information back to us. So for us, really, making the right investments in our metadata and catalog are pretty critical to delivering the right experience on voice.
So Rish, a question I wanted to ask you in terms of what connected devices are relevant. Yes, Alexa is a very important platform for Amazon, putting a lot of effort, money, development, thinking into it. Mm-hmm. But really, the biggest connected device today, certainly for Asia, is mobile. Mm-hmm. But give us a sense of what other connected devices do you think that professionals here in this audience need to at least be aware of, just to understand the importance of knowing how to meet connected device needs?
I think it's all of those devices you just mentioned. I mean, it's the mobile phones and connected speakers and the voice-controlled speakers.
Cars, in cars.
Yeah, and you know, when we think about voice, that's not just limited to an Amazon Echo. We built Alexa into our music app. And so from our perspective, regardless of the type of device, we just see that as a new interaction method of how customers are going to be asking for music and discovering music across all these platforms.
So, Sean, you are doing some amazing work here in Asia Pacific, looking at developing talent under the Sony Music umbrella, but looking at some very interesting issues, because for you, discovery is really important. In addition, the whole question of integrating music so that you've got a voice that works well. One of the big issues that you've faced is the problems, territory by territory in Asia, of different pronunciation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a very relevant thing right now, because, I mean, I'm probably the perfect example for that. You said I'm Belgium, I actually half Danish, half Belgian, but there's very few of us, so we need to get all the numbers we can get. But if I think of a few, sorry, I hear him. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. If I think of the few artists that we have signed to us in different ways of pronouncing names, that could lead to a different bit of music that people get served. So take a Swedish artist of ours called Tove Sturke.
Say again?
Tove Sturke.
Tove,
perfect example. Thanks for being the guinea pig on this.
Right.
So Tove, T-O-V-E.
Tove
Sturke.
Sturke.
S-T-Y-R-K-E.
Yeah.
Swedish name. But if you pronounce it phonetically, it might be Tove Sturk. So it is actually a 22-year-old singer. You know, also sounds Tove Sturk. It sounds like a bandit in a country western. So it's very important that those things are pronounced in the right way. And even the most simple ones, such as you have an artist called Mö. So that's with the O and the stripe through it, Danish letter, which in England is often pronounced Mo. So it's just ensuring that when people themselves don't know how to pronounce an artist, that we learn from that and their behaviors and everything you were saying to make, I think you said it perfectly when you mentioned friction, that friction needs to be non-existent. It needs to be a seamless experience for our consumers, and pronunciation plays an important role in that.
So let's take the China market, very important for all the professionals here, but there's one particular artist that has experienced 6 billion streams of his music, an artist called Alan Walker. He's in electronic dance music. He's made 27 visits to China. What do you do with Mandarin for someone like that?
Yeah, Alan's a very interesting example, because he's, by the way, everyone check him out on Wednesday. It's going to be great, so we have to plug. He's fantastic, because the entirety of the way that they set up their releases, his team, the label, the entire story around it was very well done to really tailor towards the China market as a whole. You just said a very important point, which is actually visiting the market and making sure there's presence. And through that, localizing content, ensuring that the messaging that goes out through partners such as Tencent. So Alan in China is very closely connected to Liquid State, which is the Sony Music Tencent.
That's in
music,
Shanghai, right? Liquid
based
State?
in Shanghai.
Right.
So they together are creating amazing bits of content, obviously very tailored to the Chinese and international market.
Right.
But what's really important is actually sitting down and ensuring that those messages are correctly translated, are correctly localized, to ensure that they meet the right people and the right fans, which is sometimes not as straightforward to do. So it's really important that's properly set up.
So Adrian, you've worked with some really fantastic artists that have their own character, texture, and territorially work in an interesting way. You've got someone that's making big moves in both the Philippines and Korea, called Rina Sawayama. But what's your take on machine learning and how machine learning might be able to enhance connected music experiences?
It's a big question. I think there's a number of things, because connected devices obviously can be very broad and wide in terms of, yes, we've got mobile, we've got Echo devices, etc. But with the onset of the Internet of Things and 5G, what becomes a connected device could be a fridge, it could be all sorts of things. So the access to calls to action to trigger playbacks through the speakers could be coming from all sorts of environments and places, not just the car or the home. So I think when that comes to some of the things that Simon was talking about in terms of the context of the request on the connected device is very much about replacing potentially some of that playlist environment that exists today. So music to cook to, play my running playlist, etc. You're going to have a much more sort of nuanced experience whereby it's going to be very personal to you, and you might be in the kitchen and you might be running or you might be doing whatever, but you'll be saying, play me running music, play me something to cook to, I'm feeling stressed, I need a chill out playlist. The calls that you're going to make on those devices or that fridge to play the music out of the connected device is going to be, you know, quite specific, and as Rishi says, the demand, the expectation is very immediate. You know, so the tolerance for a poor experience is going to be weak. So to answer your question about the machine learning, the more connected devices become a part of this ecosystem, machine learning loves data, obviously, loves use, and that's going to improve the experience of us all on an individual level. And I think that throws up some really interesting dynamics in terms of, well, what does that mean for a curated playlist by Amazon or Spotify or Apple? Do we need curated playlists anymore? Are we going to just receive a very well-honed, rhythmically driven experience? And then do we look at, you know, adding more sort of contextual stuff around that in the service? So I think we're in a tipping point over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years where the machine learning aspect of what we currently experience is going to move massively. And you'll see already with things like the YouTube Music experience, if anybody have used that, you know, out the box, you're automatically getting information that's being fed into it from, could be your Gmail, could be your Waze, could be your use of YouTube to date. Very, very personalized experience. And the machine learning is all integral to that.
So one other element worth thinking about, particularly for this audience, is Oculus and what's happening with VR. That's also connected experience.
100%.
So give us your sense of that.
I think VR is obviously voice is all very much here and now, as are some of those connected devices we've talked about, speakers, etc. VR is obviously a little ways away, but is moving at pace. You know, we are on a hockey stick sort of development curve of the way that VR will take off. And again, to Tom's point, the way that we interact in a virtual environment, which is a whole other ecosystem that we're going to have to go and play in, which is going to be good fun. You know, the way that we respond and interact in that, again using voice, but in a visual medium, is going to be really interesting. And the way that you respond to something of a visual nature and ask to call on a piece of content is going to be different to some degree to the way that we might automatically, you know, call on something to provide an audio experience. So, you know, Oculus today, Oculus Go is a $250 out the box, pretty good experience. But that's kind of like looking at an iPod in 2003.
That's true.
Yeah, you know, so we're going to, that space is going to balloon, and I think that's both creatively really interesting and challenging at the same time. But it's a really exciting space.
So Samir, here's a question for you, because you focus a lot on ecosystem development. You develop an ecosystem, improve it, improve it, improve it. If we're looking at new aspects, new elements of interaction in an ecosystem, what's driving, like for example, what would you say over the next 6 to 18 months we should be aware of that is going to enhance the connected experience?
So I think one is definitely the context-based recommendations, right? So we are investing very heavily in making it really effortless, friction-free for you to find the right music at the right time. You already see aspects of it in the music app if you've used it on YouTube Music. We're just doing more and more with that. So thinking about how can we provide more structured metadata or additional signals that can then help train the algorithm to do the right thing in the right moment is going to be huge. I think the second thing also is artists are getting really creative in using the technology, right? Yesterday we celebrated T-Series getting to...
T-Series from India.
From India.
60 million...
They're at 62, I believe.
62 million subscribers.
Subscribers.
So they subscribe to the T-Series
channel
on YouTube. Right.
And so the artists, labels, these companies are doing so many creative things with the YouTube platform in terms of how they're trying to then go and engage their fans. So the second thing that the connected devices gives you the opportunity for is to think about where all can that fan interaction get triggered and happen.
Exactly.
I think we barely scratched the surface there, right? We are all thinking in a very like what we see is what we're doing, but I see from my kids' point of view, right? I get all my product ideas from my kids, and you know, they want to really write a letter to Taylor Swift. They are very serious, she and her friends, of inviting Taylor Swift to their graduation party for their 5th grade, and they believe in it somehow, right? And they're online searching how are they going to get in touch with her. But imagine if there was a way where she doesn't need to physically come here, but you could use virtual reality or some other way to create that personal connection between the fan and the artist. That's going to be so special and huge and scale. So I think there's so much opportunity for using technology to bring that friction down quite a bit and make it magical.
I think there's also a point that, without sounding old school, there's an upside to what we might know as traditional marketing in the context of speech-driven calls to action, right? I mean, posters, as an example, are a really good example of a form of marketing that we as marketeers, we know that we need to do. It's awareness, but it's very difficult to go back to the attribution of whether that poster was actually eliciting a listen, if you like.
Good point.
However, in a speech-driven environment, you've got a big poster on a wall and you're in your car and you've got a very slick interface with your car audio experience, and you look at a poster because you're sat at the traffic lights, inevitably, and you know, you're saying, you know, play me this, or buy me tickets for that, or because you've been triggered by a relatively traditional offline medium to use the benefit of the more, you know, sophisticated search engines and the calls to action that you can do.
That's how
and so that means that marketing doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, expensive iterations like, oh my God, I can only play in this space if I've got enough money to go and create a beautiful piece of VR content. Yes, brilliant, go and do that, that's great. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to call to action to consumers that will elicit a response that's very, very immediate in whatever environment you happen to be in, going back to the connected IoT.
Rishi, what do you say to that?
Well, one thing I was going to say is, yeah, it's definitely harder to kind of drive discovery in the voice environment. And you know, one of the things we've seen artists doing is they'll release a single and they'll actually tweet out and say, you know, ask Alexa to play me my new single. And when that happens, the customers expect that it's going to work. And so one of the learnings is making sure this content is actually being delivered well in advance of when it's coming out, so that can be processed in our systems, and those queries can actually work when customers say them.
I mean, I think that's, sorry to dominate, but I think it's also an opportunity for catalogue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
absolutely.
Bringing back catalogue, which we need to invent a new word for the name catalogue because it's a bit outmoded, but you know, that's a great way of surfacing and bringing to attention people. The big question is, we talked about it a little earlier, okay, so you've asked it to play, you know, John Grant or Cigarettes After Sex.
Cigarettes After Sex, good band.
Cigarettes After Sex. But what happens after you've done that initial call to action because you've seen the poster or whatever, it's where does the journey follow after that?
Very important.
And you know, it's a really important part of the machine learning as well.
Sean, there's an interesting thing that you are very aware of in terms of discovery, because you're working with the #1 DJ in the world, Martin Garrix, but more importantly, something that you call choice paralysis, where people are paralyzed, they've got so much choice. That's an issue too that affects your connected experience, no?
It is, but, and probably everything that's been said so far will actually help alleviate that. So what I'm referring to with choice paralysis is, you know, it's like when someone comes up to you and it says, what's your favorite band? And you think about it every day and suddenly it's shit, you know, what is it again? And you just say Beatles or something because the first thing that pops to mind.
Yeah.
And that might be the same with the connected device. If you're talking to a Google Home or an Alexa and you're going, oh, play me some, and you get nervous and you start trembling and suddenly you think, oh shit, Alexa's going to say this on stand.
Does that happen to any of you here in the audience?
Please say yes. There we go.
Never.
But that will be alleviated as we learn more about consumer behaviors, as people understand what situations are. I think something that you just mentioned that's so important, so exciting from a marketing perspective is that creativity element to deal with that as well. So we are now able to be so much more creative in our marketing messaging.
Give us an example.
So I think a lot of consumers, when they portray personality onto the voice they hear through a connected device. And that personality is going to be different based on their household situation. So if you're a family with 2 kids, you are working in an ecosystem where it might be your nanny. Alexa might be your nanny, or Google Home might be your nanny. Whereas if, you know, I'm single, I'm 33 years old, might be very different. Well, it is very different for me. I get home and it might be more companionship and an assistant and someone I talk to weirdly when I get home. So within that, knowing those parameters and those frameworks, it actually gives a lot of ammo to come up with creative marketing ideas of how to connect our right artists with our fans, knowing who they are. So, you know, it's not, a lot of people love to say big out-of-the-box creative thinking for marketing campaigns, but that can actually be very confusing and more dangerously very irrelevant. So it's important to set those initial parameters by understanding who they are and what their situation is, to then come up with very creative marketing ideas to hit them in the right way.
One of the things that we're looking at is how can, where, at what point is the hardware and the technology going to be able to, and the willingness of the speaker environment, for example, or Alexa, for example, to respond to calls to action as well. So obviously I can ask it to play certain music, but what about if I said, okay, we did something with Amazon or with Google or whoever on a Friday at 4 p.m. If a certain word is said to that speaker, then that will elicit something else to happen. It might be, you know, the album is made available or there's some exclusive tickets that are made available, but that's challenging at the moment to do lots and lots of bespoke initiatives, but that's sort of, that would be interesting because that will light people up in their experience. Event-based, appointment to view, if you like, interactions, which will come, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Samia, you've been a great protagonist for women in engineering in Silicon Valley and thinking about what women consumers in music want to see, want to hear. Obviously, this is an extension of what Sean and Adrian have been talking about, where you're looking at women's tastes. Sometimes they say that a woman's taste will govern what gets bought or played in the home. Any thoughts on that because of this issue?
Yeah, no, I think I would use demographics more than just a targeted women thing, right? Like, I think the reason is because I think it's very hard to categorize people by like purely gender or ethnicity or where you come from, but the whole point of personalization and targeting is when you do understand more than your more granular demographic data about your user base, you can do more interesting and pointed targeting, right? So even in ads on Google, for instance, or on YouTube, we went from a purely impression-based model where just how many ad impressions did you get is what we were measuring initially for success, to then what is the click-through rate you get, right? Because you can show ads to everybody, but only 3 people are clicking it, then you might as well just show it to those 3 people who will click it.
Right.
And then we came up with like TrueView ads on YouTube saying, why don't we just give the user the option to skip the ad, and really then the person who's watching that ad is truly an engaged user, much better than just showing it in front of you. So I think it's the same kind of thing that we can do with this inclusive design thinking or and targeting, which is you might think you're going after the 18 to 34 demographic, for instance, and then you start pulling it apart and you realize, even though I was thinking 18 to 34 with my app or whatever, somehow more men are using it than women. So why is that happening? And then you can decode that and try out experiments to increase that reach that you might be missing out on.
I think that's a huge point, isn't it, about AI and the voice interaction is it's removing the barriers to entry, so people are able to, we've got 8 to 13-year-olds who are just growing up with this, assuming that this is how they're going to interact with things, and actually it's unlocking a whole older demographic of people who can't work out what a subscription service is, but they can say play Elvis to a speaker, and they're engaged with that, and so that broadens out the services radically.
Yeah, and I think one of the catches here is because all of us are starting to rely more and more on machine learning and training data sets, you can also skew your machine to show the biases that you have if you're not careful. Right?
Exactly.
Like if your training data is biased, your product ends up getting biased. I think all of us have experienced it. And being able to kind of watch out for that proactively, I think just increases your reach.
Well, we could go on for another couple of hours here. We've got such great, great thinkers, thinking, ideas. Hopefully it's stimulated yourselves. Samia, thank you so much for coming all the way from San Francisco. Tom, you too from Emeryville, the great Republic of Emeryville. Rishi from Seattle. Sean from Belgium and Hong Kong. And Adrian from
London.
Great Britain. Ladies and gentlemen, please give our distinguished panel a great round of applause. A fantastic session today. Thank you, thank you, thank you.